This episode of RHR was brought to you by Unchained. Unchained is here building out the financial services platform for Bitcoin Standard. Their cornerstone product is their Vault product, a 2 or 3 multi-sig vault where you hold 2 keys. Unchained holds 1. This is a collaborative custody model. They're expanding the offerings for their vault where you can hold 1 key and you can delegate keys to other institutions. You can hold no keys if you're an enterprise level. They have a lending desk as well. You can use Bitcoin as collateral. If you're a business to get out a US dollar loan. They have an IRA product. If you want to roll your fiat IRA into Bitcoin, Unchained makes it very easy. They're expanding their product offering every day. They have a trading desk if you want to buy large sums of Bitcoin and send it straight to cold storage, multi-sig cold storage. They make it very easy. Go to unchained.com, set up a call with their consultation team today, their concierge service team. Use the code RHR for $50 off that consultation. Unchained.com. Use the code RHR. This episode of RHR was also brought to you by good friends at Coinkite. They make the best hardware in the space, including this block clock, which is right behind me. Their hardware wallets are the best. I use the Cold Card Q. It's been my daily driver for many months now, and I think it is the best hardware wallet on the market. It is a beautiful form factor. Looks somewhat like a BlackBerry. It's got a battery pack. You never have to plug it into an internet-connected device. However, it is QR code and NFC compatible. It's got a QR scanner and an NFC compatible device in it. They just pushed push TX functionality to the Cold Card Q firmware. Actually happened yesterday. And so now, if you want to construct and sign a transaction on the Cold Card and then broadcast it via NFC and mempool.space, you can do that with your phone very easily. Best hardware in the space. Go to coinkite.com, pick up a Q, pick up a Cold Card MK4, pick up the Sats cards, the tab signer, the block clocks. If you want the best hardware, go to Coinkite.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
All right, what is up, freaks? Gonna set the tone. Reminder: the audio is being recorded, so if you're privacy conscious and you want to ask a question in the end, just realize that your voice is being recorded. But we have 30 minutes today, Matt. We have done no prep for this rabbit hole recap, but considering the guests we have today, Max Hildebrand, Adam Back, I think we should talk about privacy, the attack on wallet developers building privacy tools, and Adam, particularly for you, having gone through the PGP wars in the 90s, what are some of the parallels that you're seeing with the attacks on developers, whether it's Tornado Cash, Samurai, and the effect that's had on the industry?
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certainly a history of developers getting into legal trouble on privacy and electronic cash related things. So Phil Zimmerman, of course, with PGP was under federal indictment for a number of years, and eventually that was resolved. And I guess another famous one is eGold, which was a kind of a bit centralized, but a gold-backed electronic money system. And they also got into legal trouble. I think that was to do with KYC in that case, and Phil Zimmerman to do with export controls of encryption software. But yeah, you could imagine that this is the reason that Satoshi chose to stay very anonymous. I mean, those are the two that I can think of as a reason. But clearly, electronic cash is geopolitically interesting, and so if you are standing up a new system, you could get pushback for that. And then, yeah, I think the other factor is sometimes whether you're just building software or you're actively involved in being a counterparty or a transmitter and something like that, right? So generally the sort of better decentralized technologies do better on that basis. Probably also if it's open source, where there's no identifiable company, just like lots of independent developers, it's harder for them to influence something truly decentralized.
I think the PGP case with Phil Simmerman is very interesting and still quite different, because Phil knew that what he was doing was officially illegal, right? There was clear law saying that you cannot export this military-grade technology, and encryption was classified as military-grade. And so he was outright breaking the law, knowingly so. And then he needed basically to challenge the existing set of rules and try to rewrite it. And the strategy was to do so in court. This is quite similar to, or quite different to today's cases, where especially self-custodial tech is clearly not regulated as a bank, right? Because it's a communication service at most. But still, crackdowns are happening. So this is some differences here.
Well, I mean, regulators are definitely trending towards trying to make self-custody wallets MSBs, money transfer businesses. I mean, they're clearly not. You're not actually custodying any funds. The developer's not in the flow in the transaction flow at all. But I think attempts will be made, will continue to be made. I think we did have a small win this week. It was, I mean, by the way, show of hands, who's here for Nostr? Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
So this is really like, for us, this is conference day 3 now. But so it's been hard to keep up with the news, but there was a FinCEN guidance that they were trying to do KYC on self-custody wallets that I think they just got rid of.
Really?
Yeah. Like that goes all the way back from the Trump days. Remember like the last like 15 days of Trump, like Mnuchin tried to
sneak it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other weird part about this, because compared to the 90s and PGP, it seems like the regulatory environment has evolved significantly to the point where we have these supranational organizations like the Financial Action Task Force, OFAC, that put out these guidelines that are adopted. And so it does make it a bit harder to work through like traditional political means, because you have these agencies that exist that nobody votes for and are basically they're a bunch of bureaucrats that are making decisions without any democratic say in the process. Anybody?
Yeah, I mean it's ridiculous. It's frustrating and ridiculous. I think Adam was because you've been in this space for so long, since before Bitcoin. Adam was like very early on in my conversations with him. He always said that it's a 2-pronged fight, right? It's like the tools, and then there's going to be legal battles, and you're going to have to fight things in court. And I think we're starting to see that really happen. So you have to like kind of look at it from 2 directions. You have to support developers that are building the tools and make the tools more robust and always open source. And as a result, it's just harder to enforce any kind of unreasonable regulation. And then second, we're going to have to do some legal battles, and those are going to be expensive cases, and they need to have proper lawyers that know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think somebody who's legally qualified and read the Tornado Cash documents was saying that they were recognizing in that the concept of non-custodial decentralized technology, but unfortunately for Tornado Cash, they had a kind of web interface which was centrally hosted, and like 90% or most of the use was actually through that interface. And so I think they were sort of applying the argument that, well, the underlying tech may be decentralized, but the way you're using it is not. So you could at any time interfere, right? They could change the front end code, kind of like Hushmail when they were pressured into changing the interface to, target attack individual users. So the architecture that was getting used in practice most of the time in Tornado Cash was like that. So apparently that's in the arguments in the document. So of course these arguments play out in court and they're like very long and so on. But even I think the prosecution's argument talked about this factor that, so it seems like the decentralization is, even by the prosecution, recognized as a defense.
Yeah, but I mean, the same arguments can be applied to any software developer, right? If why don't you implement full KYC for all of your users? You have the power to do so, right? In your tech, Bitcoin Core developers could do, right? But of course, there's good reasons not to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe that's a good question, but I think there's a difference between what you are doing. Like, I think it's harder for regulators to demand that you redesign an application to make it centralized, or to make it more possible to interfere, where it's sort of quasi-arguably custodial, or custodial if you interfered kind of thing. Whereas if it's open source and people can download it, and they have downloaded it, and there's no auto upgrade, and they're de facto doing peer-to-peer things, I think that's harder to challenge.
Yeah. With that in mind, Max, like, in your mind, with everything that's happened this year, what do you think the most pressing needs are on the tool side to sort of react? And
well, I think resilience on all types of levels, right? We see that many third-party trust assumptions that are made can be violated, right? Domain names can be seized, for example. Servers can be shut down and such. And software clients should be built in a way that handle these cases well. Right? That if a domain goes down, the client doesn't just stop working, right? There's still ways around it and such.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys did a really good job with Wasabi recently in terms of removing the coordinator that was run by ZK Snacks, and then providing basically the ability for, I mean, Kooks did a lot of great work with BTC Pay Server, making it easy to run your own coordinator, and then allowing users to then choose the coordinator themselves, and almost like it's a kind of like a marketplace of coordinators where they have different fees and different uptime and different liquidity, and so you can choose which one you want to use. I do wonder, and I'm kind of curious on Adam's opinion here, is like a lot of people in the industry are saying that if you make money, then that exposes you to more risk. Like if there's a way that you're making money off of your software wallet, even if it's self-custody, that's where you're at more risk. But to me, I kind of feel like, yeah, maybe that's like the low-hanging fruit, but regulators will always kind of look for whatever, if they want to do something, they kind of look for whatever angle they can justify coming in, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like they got Al Capone for tax evasion, right? So they're looking at the punchline, and any avenue of attack will do, and they'll get creative too if they really want to get somebody for some reason. If they really don't like something, they'll find an excuse. But it depends on the country and the independence of the courts. And the U.S. courts have recently shown independence from the SEC, like forcing the SEC to change, interpretations and approve the Bitcoin ETF, for example. So if you have an independent judiciary, which some countries are better at than others, then and what you're doing is clearly, legal and in society's interest, then you could ultimately prevail. But I mean, courts are kind of unreliable and expensive, and painful for people involved if they get caught in the crosshairs of that. Like Phil Simmerman and the different open source developers now on the Bitcoin or crypto space. So I think it is a factor that if there's money involved, I think the Tornado Cash had a token presumably or something, and I mean some funds have been stolen from somewhere on some hack basically, and they were going through Tornado Cash, and then the people that had been stolen from asked Tornado Cash to help them, and they didn't. They chose not to, and I think they profited greatly from that outcome. So those, and then that combined with the fact that it was actually centrally hosted in most of its use was a deciding factor in creating a problem. So, but I'm not sure of the technical definition, but I have heard that charging fees for something by a company, particularly, I guess, kind of feels like you're providing a service, right? Where if somebody downloads a copy of Signal messaging app and there's no fee, and people are chatting, then it's very hard to say that you did very much apart from provide some open source software that does some network thing, right?
This rip of RHR was also brought to you by our good friends at Stack. Stack is a cloud sourcing platform that combines the power of humans and AI to make it easy for you to complete complex tasks as a business. They are currently looking for a technical product manager for their coding bounties program. So if you want to go stackwork.com and apply for this job, I would highly do it. Paul and team at Stack are building one of the most incredible and exciting products on the market right now. If you listen to Citadel Dispatch or TFTC with Carlino from Digital Witness, he explained how Digital Witness used Stack to confirm the results of the Guatemalan presidential election last year. And Stack basically enables you to put out all these tasks. In the case of Digital Witness, they had a combination of AI and humans complete tasks to prove that votes looked a certain way and said a certain thing, and they got paid out in Bitcoin for it. So they're looking for a technical product manager for their bounties program. So go check them out. Stackwork, that's STAKWORK.com.
And that, I mean, when it comes to like wallet development, like how does Signal fund their open source? Like, do you think it makes sense for the industry within Bitcoin to move to a similar model?
I mean, Signal's just donation based,
yeah,
and the overwhelming majority of the donation was the WhatsApp founder, because he felt guilty for selling his company to Facebook, which is awesome. He should be applauded for that. I mean, I think obviously we're in a very good place in Bitcoin right now. If you look in like the last 3 years in terms of open source funding and nonprofit funding, we can always be in a better place. Obviously, Bitcoin makes it a lot easier. On Signal, one of the things they realized in Signal is they made it very little friction to donate and support them, and you get a little social signal too. You get the little badge if you're supporting them. Everyone you chat with sees it. And I think there's something to be said there on twofold, right? It's like you reduce the friction and you give a social signal. And I mean, that's what I'm really excited about with Nostr's apps, because I think, the ideal situation is that the users are donating directly without a middleman. And the way to do that is to reduce the friction and add the social signal. And that's what we're seeing with Zaps. Now, the bigger issue is obviously very few people are using Nostr yet. So there's just not that many people. And then second of all, donation funding, running a business is hard. Running a project based on donation funding is probably even more difficult. But maybe there is. I remember early days of Bitcoin, like people said, first, like the Bitcoiners get rich and then they just ideologically do things. And I know it's not like a perfect answer, but like the Wasabi, the most popular Wasabi coordinator right now, for instance, is just running. It's just an individual running it at 0% fee. And so like when you start running it in your head, it's like, well, is that sustainable? Like, is that actually going to happen? But maybe it does. Maybe there is, Bitcoiners that will run things and just lose money on them and just kind of bootstrap them if they need to.
And the thing is, if you want to build anything substantial, it will likely take you many years and many people collaborating. And you probably have to pay them somehow, right? Because they got to eat as well. And on the other hand, governments basically only care about stuff if it's at scale, right? If something is really small and niche and tens of people use it, nobody really cares, right? So most likely you will get to a large user base after you've put in a whole bunch of work, where then it becomes interesting. And so when that crackdown comes, do you want to be like exhausted and poor and overworked? Or do you want to have a war chest to fight the battle? Right? So I think business models are extremely essential to sustainably fund these developments.
Yeah, I mean, I think competition is good as well in the sense of lots of choices, because you've got to imagine the regulators or the prosecutors in deciding what to attack. They're going to think about the effectiveness of doing that, and there are so many dozens of open source Bitcoin full node or Lightning wallets that shutting one down is pretty much pointless. Somebody will just pick up the source code and recompile it and put it on, the app stores. There are third-party app stores, so if Apple or Google doesn't like the app, you can install it anyway. And so that that basic kind of whack-a-mole picture that you could shut one down, but it has basically no effect, and maybe it has the opposite effect, right? It's kind of the Streisand effect that people notice and they take steps to try and make it more robust and more wallets, more servers, kind of like the Wasabi case, right? More competing coordinators run by different people. And what Matt said about the kind of economics. So sometimes people will say that what if something, this is kind of unrelated, but what if something really bad happens to Bitcoin, like there's a massive bug and you have to roll things back and will that be the end of Bitcoin? And my answer is no, because other forms of money are vastly less secure, and there's $1 trillion or so of financial interest for Bitcoin to exist and function. And so, that financial interest will find a way to fix the problem. So I think that means that, if it takes people doing things because they value Bitcoin and they want to protect their investment, they'll do it. And, not everybody's a freeloader. A lot of people start to think about, the world they want to live in into the future. So I think the systems are much more robust and able to protect their self-interest. But it's really unfortunate when, people get caught in the crosshairs. I think regulations are a trailing indicator. Lots of lots of things that look ridiculous in hindsight to have been illegal were once illegal. They caught up with what society expects and wants to use, but only after a lot of pain for some individuals that got caught in the crosshairs and created the test cases that caused them to be overthrown. So, yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of this is like a timing thing too, right? I mean, what Max said is absolutely true. I mean, what we would really like to see is sustainable open source business models, right? Where you have open source software that has some kind of sustainable business model built into it. And Bitcoin does enable some interesting things there. But in practice, it's a timing issue on two sides, right? The first timing issue is regulators will probably be worse before they're better, right? Like there should be light at the end of the tunnel. The question is like, how long is the darkness? And then the second piece is like the unspoken reality that no one really talks about in the Bitcoin space is the only business that really has product market fit right now at scale is just buy, sell Bitcoin with KYC fully regulated. It's like those companies make bank, and then everyone else is kind of just trying to build the future they want to see. But the question is that going to be 5 years? Is that going to be 10 years? And it could be a quite long road. And then at the same time, when you do have like trailblazers like a Wasabi or a Samurai or a Sparrow that have an open source wallet with a sustainable business model attached to it, then regulators come in and whack it if they get any kind of success.
And there is a praxeology of violence, right? Thieves are actors too, and they're entrepreneurs in a sense. They think that they're better off after stealing from you or shutting down your business. But there's a cost to such things as well. And if the cost is greater than the reward, then it's a loss-making venture, and eventually the thief starves. So you can take active steps to increase the cost of attack and decrease the likelihood of success. On numerous levels in basically anything that you do. So with this as a mindset, you can reduce the likelihood and the severity of an attack, hopefully.
Well, with that in mind and talking about timing, like as all this has been unfolding, throughout this year, you've had the emergence of Chalmia mints with the proliferation of Cashew and the launch of Fedimint protocol. With that in mind, Max, like, what do you think individuals or a quorum of individuals running the mints on these protocols should think about?
Well, eCash money warehouses are much more similar to the PGP case, right? As we spoke earlier, it's probably quite illegal to custody money for someone else at scale as a business without a license in that region, right? There's clear laws stating this, so it's risky business for sure. On the other hand, again, this is also just a protocol and speech, and so. Information longs to be free, and people will use tools that help them, especially if they're cheap and easy and quick to use.
I mean, I think with Fedimint, there's a lot of parallels to the structure of Liquid. I'm kind of curious, Adam, like, how do you think about the legal exposure for something like Liquid?
Yeah, I mean, so the question for, I mean, I guess one point is there are lots of Canaries, which is to say there are dozens and dozens of altcoins and smart contract chains that are basically operating in the same way. They're block signers. And they use confusing terminology, like they'll say they're validators or something, but basically they're block signers. And so, and then the way things work in a lot of countries is you can either go to the regulator and ask them for an opinion about how you're architecting something, or you can go to a regulatory law firm and ask them for an opinion, and then you put that in a drawer so that if a regulator ever comes and asks you questions, you say, well, this is the opinion we're relying on. And so, people have opinion letters about things like Liquid and electronic cash systems and the parameters in which they should be interpretable as a blockchain, right? Because a blockchain is, Bitcoin's the gold standard, so everybody says that Bitcoin is a blockchain. Anything that is slightly different than Bitcoin, they start to question whether it loses its blockchainness, right? And so the argument there is it's sufficiently decentralized and doesn't involve any discretion in its operation because it's all in HSMs, and the individual operators don't really have any discretionary control, which is where the functionary name comes in because it's kind of a non-discretionary thing, so that it gets treated as a blockchain as far as as far as the operators are concerned, and there are I think there are opinions in a couple of countries as well. So that's how the Liquid part of it works. But of course, there's a couple of individuals or one-man companies involved, but also a lot of exchange operators and so on. The advantage of that is they anyway need to have, the physical security for operating high-value exchange servers and things like that. And it's using HSMs as well. And Blockstream itself is like just a technology provider. We don't operate these things. And Fedi is like a very similar model, but with this similar in the technology sense that there's coordination about which set of the data to sign, and that it's in a threshold federation, but with more of a community involvement twist. So Liquid has, as I say, a few small players, like small companies and individuals even, who are operating a node or part of the network. But Fedi takes it more in the community sense, and so encourages people to run their own, basically. And I think people like the concept of running their own. And I think ultimately, these things are adaptive. So maybe if you look at Napster versus BitTorrent, things like that, the things which are sufficiently decentralized become a kind of losing game to shut down. And certainly the recording industry and the Motion Picture Association tried to exert a lot of legal pressure on and having favors from politicians, so to try and stop file sharing. And ultimately they lost, and then finally adapted by providing better service that you could pay for and competing in a fair sense. So we'll see how it plays out. But to say that it's I think it's just basically a gray area. And families in any way, they'll do like savings or informal things between them. So it depends what scale you're talking about and what country. Some countries, most people don't have bank accounts, and then they maybe have some kind of community-based savings scheme, and that's just how things work in that country. So that's not how it works in Latvia or UK or various countries, but things are different around the world. And, if it solves the problem, people want to use it, and it's decentralized and they're not hurting anybody, ultimately they should be able to do that, I think. So I think the other attitude and mindset is, people are just going about their lives and trying to improve their sovereignty and get utility, and the governments are public servants, right? So ultimately what we want should prevail, and we should try to make that so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can run a mint now on your browser, right, on the phone. It's these technology, the cost to operate them has decreased substantially, and the need for to ask for permission is basically zero. Right? Back in the early days of eCash, the operator needed to have a bank account, right, or a physical warehouse for the gold. Now you don't need that anymore, right? You can literally do it on the phone, and this just means the tech is much more easy to spread and hard to stifle. However, of course, governments only ban what's popular. So as this reaches scale, there will certainly be friction. The question then is, how is the cost-benefit analysis for this specific case? But it's looking pretty good, I guess.
Yeah. And on that point, do you think it's time for the industry to be more proactive in terms of lobbying to basically get laws written or get explicit legal protection for the types of software that are being developed in this space?
I mean, it could be. I mean, I haven't seen that yet in software development, but that has become an emerging factor in the US with the SEC, so that, the SEC is having a bad run, and some of the things SEC are losing are not even good for us, right? I mean, they kind of, failed at their own game, basically. It backfired on them. And so I think the exchange operators in the US are smelling blood in the water and starting to just, countersue. And so, you've got to think that if they lose too many cases, and I think there have been some high-profile legal people leaving the SEC because, they were a big part of the strategy that lost in court. So, I think we have to see if there's any kind of sea change in because there's a particular factor in the US, which is the regulatory agencies had some kind of discretion to behave in a certain way. And there's, what is it, the Chevron case, you guys might know more about it, where that has finally been overturned, which is actually a really big deal. So, that changes the dynamic so that, unelected bureaucrats can't make up the rules and, prosecute people based on their own opinion. They now need to go to a court, and the court is much better at balancing and interpreting the law generally. So it becomes much more realistic to get satisfaction through the courts. Of course, it's really expensive and slow, dangerous process.
There's actually 3 court cases in Europe right now pending against governments to challenge KYC rules on constitutional privacy grounds.
There we go. I don't know how the EU courts are. But going back to Chevron deference too, on top of that in the United States at least, what's been beneficial for us over the last few years is that we have individual states getting pretty pissed off at the federal government, and so they're feeling emboldened to sue the government as well. State attorney generals. Matt spoke with one at the park.
Kind of unreal. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be proactive across the board, both on the tool side and then also on the legal side. But I would caution on this idea of lobbying for new laws or regulatory clarity, quote unquote regulatory clarity. In general, the legal landscape should be less. Just stay out of the way. Don't get involved.
Agree. I think the posturing should be sue the government.
And that's why I love division of labor, because I don't have to worry about the politicking. Others can do that. And I there's certainly probably some benefit in trying to decrease the harm of the train wreck. On the other hand, probably reforming a fundamentally broken system will cause you a lot of headache and pain. So I think the cypherpunk vision of building an alternative and simply opting out is the much more mentally sane strategy, and also the much more effective one in ultimately improving the government, because there's nothing that sends a message of you are not welcome here than leaving and ultimately withdrawing from the consent of being governed.
I mean, the last thing I ever wanted to do was be involved in politics, but I think it's important for people to realize that sometimes you just get dragged into these things. So be aware, freaks, that it should always at least be on the back of your mind. You should be considering all possibilities, and And so sometimes you will just, I think as an industry in general, we're basically, we have our back against the wall. So, you know, if a guy walks in and points a gun at you, you can't be like, oh, well, I'm opting out of guns. Like you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in a way, you know, the internet itself was not popular with the establishment to start with because it changed the balance of power about the ability to self-publish, to comment, and realistically, so-called democracies had a very tight control of the media. And of course, that's come full circle now, and some of the social media companies did some pretty atrocious things in political interference and political speech. But I think, you know, the fact of the matter is that you can't argue with physics like in the real world, and the internet has physics. You know, information wants to be free, so actually censoring information is extremely difficult and impractical ultimately, which is why the file sharing wars were kind of unwinnable. And I think with, you know, privacy technology and, you know, peer-to-peer electronic money like things, you've also got some internet physics at play. And what we're seeing is that physics improving or the implementation is getting closer to what's possible, or the optimal form. And then that will sort of define, you know, how decentralized it's possible to be, where people can just switch provider or be fully peer-to-peer, have open source. And then it becomes just a societal norm. What do people want to use? I mean, the fact of the matter is that, you know, a vast number of people were, you know, downloading movies and music, and they didn't really care, and they thought that was their right to do, or that's what they wanted to do. So, you know, the fact that there are copyright laws or various laws arguing that that's not correct, they didn't agree, right? So, you know, they haven't overturned copyright, but de facto it became irrelevant on the internet. And so I think ultimately society tends to catch up with what most people want to do.
Freaks, looks like we're out of time. I just want to thank you all for joining us. This packed room is always awesome to see. And hopefully we get to talk to a lot of you throughout the week.
Max, Adam, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.